Okay, let's look at Arne's answer. Nowadays, there are various dichotomous approaches to understanding the flow of British history to 1979. I think this is a hang-up from IELTS. Why are there dichotomous approaches nowadays? Weren't there dichotomous approaches at the time of the Magna Carta? I don't think the time period changes whether you can understand history via dichotomy theory or not. According to a theory defined by Versi. Now, is this Versi's theory, or did Versi get it from somewhere else? You also need to leave a space between Versi and the year. Superior dichotomies, does that explain it properly? And what exactly does it mean? Superior dichotomy should satisfy 4 essential elements: clarity, concision, conciseness, comprehensiveness, insightfulness. As prerequisite conditions for what? You need to explain that much, much more. Okay, so you haven't explained the theoretical basis. You've just quoted Versi briefly, too briefly. As somebody who hasn't gone to the lecture, and as somebody who hasn't listened to Chris talk about this, I can't understand what you're talking about, I'm afraid. You have to be much more explain things like that clearly to the reader. Okay, the dichotomous approach of dividing into democracy and autocracy. Of dividing what into democracy and autocracy is the most logical and widely applicable dichotomy that is useful in comprehending British history to 1979. Okay, so far between these 2 points, you haven't explained enough. You're assuming a lot of knowledge of the reader. This is what we call reader-responsible writing. You need to write in a writer-responsible way. I know you like philosophy, so I'll put it that way. In countries like Korea and Japan, writers generally expect the reader to understand quite a lot. But in the UK, it's the opposite. We write as if the reader doesn't know very much, and we have to explain. The reason we do this is to show the teacher that we understand it. So based on what you wrote above, there's no evidence that you really understand the theory because you haven't explained it clearly enough so that I could understand it, having not been to the lecture. So try again with the paragraph above. And I see this is your thesis. Notice that you've got dichotomies, so it might be that he expects more than one dichotomy. And you have one, okay? So just bear that in mind. You don't need to say the essay is critical. All essays should be critical. How useful it is, we don't know what it is. So how you say what it is before you say how useful it is. Not good to start a sentence with and. What is the comparative advantage analysis? Now, probably all the dichotomies are useful. So you don't want to refute the dichotomies, but you need to say which ones are more useful or more important and give reasons. So this is not mathematics. I don't think you can show that some dichotomies are not valid, because I'm sure they all fit a theory. And try and find out where the original theory comes from. Maybe this is Chris's theory, but maybe it came from something he read. And also, it's better, how are you going to reference Versi here? Has he written a book about this? If so, you could reference the book, but referencing what a lecturer says is not generally considered to be very academic. Although Chris is a very credible source. And finally, lastly, reasonable values of outstanding dichotomy into democracy and autocracy in each of the three elements will be evaluated. It doesn't really make any sense. Okay, so I can see what you're trying to do here. I understand and I understood what you told me in our tutorial, but this is not explained enough so that a non-specialist reader could understand. So try to explain it more clearly. There's some really good writing there. In terms of these dichotomies, are there any writers that talk about them? Have any writers used these dichotomous approaches to explain British history? You might find it easier if you refer to those people and reference them as well. Okay, moving on. Okay, Justin. The issue of whether Scotland should be independent or not has been in debate for hundreds of years. Do you have a reference for that? Earlier, on the 26th of November 2013, you don't need to say earlier. It's obvious that it happened in the past. Scotland's future, you need that in inverted commas or italics. Taken in charge by Alex Salmond. The government or the document? Who, you're saying Alex Salmond was in charge of what? The Scottish government, yeah, they do have a parliament, but Whitehall is in charge of that parliament, so it's unclear what you mean by in charge by Alex Salmond. Who points out, I think this is the past now, so you can use the past. He pointed out determination, maybe decision is a better word here. Okay, you've got a good reference here, that's good. Okay, like everybody else, you've looked at what the people said as your way of showing the arguments on both sides. But it would be more objective. That is, of course, important evidence, but it might be more objective to talk about what the arguments are on both sides and to lay out that there are two sides of the argument. And the same advice I've given to everybody, I would give to you as well. Okay, so you can argue something, but you can't. Argue is the wrong word here. I think it's discuss. At least nowadays. What do you mean by in nowadays? It doesn't quite make sense. You mean that in the future, it might not. Maybe it shouldn't be independent, or in the past it shouldn't have been part of the UK. Try to be more specific there. Okay, generally speaking, you've got a couple of references. That's good. A few grammar mistakes that make it difficult to understand what you're saying. And again, you've looked at the perspective from the voter's perspective rather than the arguments. And I think it would be nicer to just focus objectively on Scotland's case, whether it should be independent or not, from an objective point of view. And like I said before, there's as we're not Scottish discussing this question, there's the question of what is good for Scotland and the question of what is good for the UK. And there's nothing in the question that says you can't look at those two perspectives as well. Okay, good points. Okay, limitations are good, although in nowadays is not the correct way to say it. It might be better to say to show that Scotland should not be independent for the time being. But I think the case for independence in the future is even weaker than the case now, because at some point Scottish oil will run out, and the Scottish economy is not particularly built up. So with no North Sea oil, I think the case for Scottish independence is weaker. Okay, so we've got a rewrite here, so let's have a look at the rewrite. Well done, by the way, for rewriting. It's very, very good idea. Okay, so you're focusing on the Second World War as the biggest single event in human history. Okay, and yes, Britain. You don't need to use past perfect here. Of course, Britain was influenced by the Second World War, but this essay is not about the Second World War. The Second World War was just the beginning of a time period that we often think about. We often mark time periods in big changes that happened, and the Second World War is just one of them. So talking about the Second World War is not necessarily what you need here. And also, why did you use John? Are you going to use this book later? Is he an important author? If not, then we probably wouldn't use his first name. Then you go into the aim of the essay, but we haven't really given background about the issue of British decline since the end of the Second World War. I don't think the World War is the issue here. I think it's the decline or not decline that's happened since the war. And so I wouldn't give this as background. I'd talk about the decline issue. And I would look at two sides of the argument. One, the argument that Britain has been in decline to a great extent, and the other, that Britain's decline has not been to such a great extent. And maybe a deeper analysis shows that in some ways Britain has also prospered. So you're going between these 2 points. One, that Britain's has been in great decline, and the other, that Britain's decline has not been so bad, or maybe even not a decline at all. These are the two positions that you need to discuss, maybe in the background, before you go to the aim of your essay. Okay, the aim of the essay is to investigate to what extent Britain has been declined. Trying to paraphrase better, and this is a grammar mistake. Being in decline, you can't say it that way. Find out different changes happened in Britain. Well, it's not to... The aim of this essay is not to find out what changes happened to Britain. That's history. You're not writing a history essay, and that would be very descriptive. It's to analyze the effect of those changes as it refers to the question. Okay, yeah, the empire changed. Yes, okay, that's good. Collectivism. What do you mean by collectivism? You mean public? Well, privatization started in 1980, so this is not actually included in the period that we're talking about, economic freedom with individualism. Do you mean Miltonian economics versus Keynesian economics? I think you might need some reading to help you to clarify what you're talking about here. From empire towards Britain and nation state. I don't know what you mean by this. Cultural hegemony turned into cultural autonomy. Okay, I think you need to be more clear about what you're talking about here. Whose hegemony, whose autonomy? What do you mean by cultural hegemony and cultural autonomy? Okay, your thesis is quite good here. But I think overall I'd say the beginning of the essay is not really focusing on the question. and a few problems that some references and some reading would help you to clarify in your next draft. And the thesis is okay as long as you're answering this question. And remember, you're answering to what extent at the end of the day. So try to be as specific as you can in terms of answering to what extent. Okay, good point there, Auckland. Okay, and as I said, if I give feedback on this one that actually was posted Monday night, I would be encouraging you not to post on time, which I don't want to do, because if you don't do your homework on time, you'd get into a lot of trouble at university. If it's coursework, it wouldn't be marked. You'd get 0. So if what you were doing now was actually part of your coursework, it would be very, very problematic. So I don't want to train you into thinking that it's okay to submit work late. If you agree with a tutor that you're going to submit work by a certain date, it has to be submitted by that date. Okay, so feel free to give peer feedback to Sebastian here, but unfortunately, I can't give feedback. At least not here, because it's very important that you submit work on time. Okay?